Good evening. For this assignment, I reviewed Priceline's term of use, specifically sections A through F, to evaluate whether the agreement functions as a valid online contract and whether its provisions are fair and enforceable. Online terms of use agreements have become a routine part of everyday life. Yet, most customers never read them before making purchases, creating accounts, or using online services. This creates an interesting legal challenge. Companies rely on these agreements to protect themselves and establish rules for using their platforms, while consumers are often expected to comply with terms they may never have reviewed. As a result, courts have spent years examining issues such as notice, consent, attribution, and the enforceability of online agreements. In this presentation, I will discuss whether Priceline's terms of use functions as a valid contract, whether users should be bound by its provisions, whether customers can realistically sue Priceline in the event of a dispute, and what charges I would recommend to improve the agreement. Now, is Priceline's terms of use a valid contract? That's a great question. At first glance, Priceline's terms of use appear to be standard online contract. However, after reviewing the agreement and the legal principles surrounding online contracts, the answer is more nuanced than it initially appears. In my opinion, Priceline's terms of use is generally a valid contract because it contains the basic elements traditionally required for contract formation. Priceline offers access to its booking platform and travel related services. Consumers receive the benefit of those services, and the agreement establishes the conditions governing that relationship. The more difficult question is whether the agreement exists, but whether users have received sufficient notice and provide meaningful consent. Courts have historically been more willing to enforce click wrap agreements where users actively click an I agree button than browse wrap agreements that simply place terms somewhere on a website. This distinction is important because enforceability often depends on whether a reasonable consumer knew the agreement existed and had an opportunity to review it. For that reason, I believe Priceline's agreement is likely enforceable, but its strengths ultimately depends on how clearly the terms are presented and whether users are given an adequate notice before completing transactions. Next, should visitors be bound by it? Whether consumers should be bound by online agreements ultimately depends on the quality of notice and the opportunity to provide meaningful consent. While companies need terms of agreement use terms of use agreements to protect themselves, I believe users should only be bound by provisions that are reasonably disclosed and presented in a way that encourages meaningful consent. Many users never read term of use agreements because they are often lengthy, written in complex legal language, and presented as a condition of use of service. For this reason, I believe Priceline should benefit from requiring a stronger click-through acceptance process for certain activities, such as but not limited to creating an account, booking travel, or making purchases. Requiring users to actively acknowledge the agreement provides stronger evidence that consent occurs and helps avoid disputes regarding whether users are aware of the terms. Now, if you have a dispute with Priceline, can you sue them? Wonderful question. One of the most important sections of any term of use agreement involves dispute resolution. Many modern websites include travel and booking platforms, attribution clauses, and class action waivers within their agreements. These provisions can significantly impact a consumer's ability to bring a lawsuit against a company. Priceline's term of use contains a mandatory attribution agreement that and class action waiver. Under these provisions, consumers generally agree to resolve disputes through binding attribution rather than traditional litigation in court. As a result, a customer may not have the same ability to bring claims before a judge or participate in a class action lawsuit that would otherwise be available in a traditional court proceeding. From Priceline's perspective, attribution can reduce legal costs and help resolve disputes even more efficiently. However, some consumer advocates argue that attribution clauses can limit a consumer's ability to pursue legal claims, especially when the amount of money involved is relatively small. If a consumer believes they are wrongfully charged, misled by advertising, or harmed by a booking issue, they may find it more difficult to pursue a claim if they are required to attribute individually rather than participate in a class action lawsuit. The issue has been debated extensively in the legal community. Organizations such as Electronic Frontier Foundation have raised concerns regarding online agreements that contain provisions heavily favoring companies while limiting consumer rights. Critics argue that many are aware they are giving up certain legal options because they rarely Critics agree that many users are unaware that they are giving up certain legal options because they rarely read lengthy terms of use agreements before accepting them. For that reason, I believe Priceline should make any attribution provisions highly visible and explain them in plain language. Consumers should clearly understand whether they are accepting Consumers should clearly understand whether they are agreeing to attribution, whether class action rights are being waived, and what options remain available if a dispute arises. Evaluating Priceline's u- Evaluating Priceline's terms using legal consumer standards. The Digital Media Law Project recommends evaluating terms of service agreements by examining fairness, transparency, user rights, and the balance of power between the company and its users. Using that framework, Priceline's agreement should not only protect the company from unnecessary legal risks, but should also provide users with clear explanation regarding their rights and responsibilities. One aspect of One aspect of Priceline's agreement that deserves careful scrutiny involves its ability to modify portions of the terms of use over time. While businesses need flexibility to update policies as laws, technologies, and services evolve, courts have occasionally questioned whether consumer service meaningful while businesses need flexibility to update policies as laws, technology, and services evolve, courts have courts have occasionally questioned whether consumers receive meaningful notice when significant contractual changes occur. This issue becomes especially important when modifications accept dispute resolutions, procedures, privacy rights, or limitations in consumer remedies. Eric Goldman discusses this issue in his article regarding amendment clause, noting that courts have sometimes viewed unlimited modification provisions skeptically when consumers are not adequately informed about changes. If Priceline changes important provisions need if Priceline changes important provisions related to dispute resolution, privacy, or user rights, consumers should receive clear notice rather than being expected to discover those changes on their own. As a result, I believe Priceline should avoid direct notification whether significant changes are made to its terms of use. This approach would improve transparency and strengthen the likelihood that the agreement remains enforceable while also promoting consumer trust. What changes would I recommend? After reviewing Priceline's terms of use and considering the resources provided for this agreement, I believe the agreement could be strengthened through several improvements focused on transparency, consumer understanding, and informed consent. The most significant improvement I would recommend involves user consent. While online agreements are often enforceable, stronger click through acceptance procedures would provide clear evidence that consumers knowingly agree to Priceline's terms. Requiring users to effectively and actively acknowledge important provisions before creating an account or completing purchases would reduce future disputes regarding notice and consent while strengthening the overall enforceability of the agreement. Another area that deserves attention is readability. Like many online agreements, portions of Priceline's terms of use appear to be drafted primarily for legal protection rather than consumer understanding. Although legal precision, although legal although legal procedures remain important, consumers should be able to understand their rights and responsibilities without requiring legal training. Plain language summaries of key provisions could help users better understand topics such as attribution, cancellation policies, limitations of liability, and privacy practice. The agreement's approach to future modification also raises concerns. Courts have occasionally scrutinized unilateral amendment provisions when users receive little or no notice regarding contractual changes. Because important rights may be affected by future revisions, Priceline should adapt more direct methods of notification. Significant updates could be communicated through email notification, account alerts, or other prominent methods rather than relying solely on users to periodically review the agreements themselves. Finally, Priceline could improve transparency by including a concise consumer rights summary at the end of the agreements. Such a section would allow users to quickly identify important provisions involving dispute resolution, privacy practices, refund policies, and liability limitations before committing to the platform. Providing this information is a clear and in a clear and accessible format could help consumers make more informed decisions while also strengthening trust between companies and its users. My final evaluation. Overall, I believe Priceline's terms of use functions are generally valid and enforceable contract. This agreement serves an important purpose by establishing expectations between the company, its users while protecting Priceline from certain legal risks associated operating a large online travel platform. However, the agreement could be improved by making important provisions easier to understand and by ensuring that consumers receive meaningful notice of significant contractual terms. While businesses have legitimate interests in protecting themselves, consumers also deserve transparency regarding the rights they may be waiving and the obligations they are accepting. And online commerce continues as online commerce continues to evolve, courts will likely continue examining issues involving notice, consent, attribution, privacy, and unilateral modifications to online agreements. Companies that prioritize transparency and fairness will likely be in a stronger position both legally and from a customer relations perspective. To conclude, after reviewing Priceline's terms of use and the legal issues surrounding Priceline's contracts, I truly believe the agreement generally functions as a valid and enforceable contract. However, enforceability alone should not be the only goal. Companies should not strive to create agreements that are transparent, understand companies should try Companies should also strive to create agreements that are transparent, understandable, and fair to consumers. The issue discussed throughout this presentation, including consent, attribution, modification, causes, and consumer notice, demonstrate that online contracts continue to evolve alongside technology. While Priceline has legitimate business reasons for protecting itself through contractual provisions, consumers should also be given meaningful opportunities to understand the rights they are accepting and in cases waiving. Ultimately, my recommendation is not that Priceline eliminate its terms of use, but that it improve transparency through stronger click-through consent, clear explanation of important provisions, and better notification practices when significant changes occur. Doing so would strengthen customers' trust while also improving the overall enforceability of the agreement. Thank you for listening to my evaluation of Priceline's terms of use.